Shortly after the discovery of X-rays, radioactivity became a real sensation. Gradually, products such as beauty creams, chocolates, cigarettes, and even everyday items like water began to include elements that emitted radiation. Doctors used X-rays to examine their patients, and it was not uncommon for them to experience issues such as hair loss weeks later, which raised some concerns. The major problem of the time was the lack of control over the intensity of exposure. People did not yet fully understand what the maximum safe dose of radiation was. Ionizing radiation, which can be dangerous, affects living beings depending on the dose and duration of exposure. In the early years of using radiation for medical and commercial purposes, technology was advancing rapidly, but knowledge about the risks was still limited. The consequences of uncontrolled radiation exposure began to become evident over time. For example, radiation was used in beauty devices and even in products like cigarettes and water, promoted as beneficial but actually causing severe health damage. Today, X-rays and radioactive materials are widely used in disease diagnosis, cancer treatment, nuclear power plants, and dating ancient materials. Radiation therapy, for example, uses radiation to destroy cancer cells, and nuclear medicine employs radioactive tracers for imaging exams, allowing for more accurate diagnoses. However, it is essential to manage and control radiation exposure to minimize risks. But why is ionizing radiation, something we cannot detect through taste, smell, or hearing, so dangerous? And while it has many beneficial uses, it poses significant risks if not properly managed. To understand this, we need to start with a simple definition of radiation. Radiation is energy in transit, usually emitted by a source and transmitted through a vacuum, air, or material medium. We can encounter radiation in the form of particles, such as protons, neutrons, and electrons, or in the form of electromagnetic waves, such as visible light, X-rays, and gamma rays. However, when we talk about dangerous radiation, we are referring to a specific type, ionizing radiation. This radiation has enough energy to ionize atoms, meaning it can remove electrons from atoms. The amount of energy needed to ionize an atom depends on how strongly the electron is bound to the atom's nucleus. Some atoms, like cesium, have electrons that are very loosely bound, so it does not take much effort to remove them. In addition to direct effects on DNA, radiation can also cause indirect effects through the generation of free radicals. These radicals are highly reactive atoms or molecules that can damage other cells and tissues by bonding with molecules in various ways. Prolonged or intense exposure can lead to a range of health problems, including cardiovascular diseases and neurological effects. The periodic table, which shows us the different atoms that exist, reveals that ionizing radiation varies between atoms. Considering the main atoms present in the human body, hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen, we can calculate the maximum energy required for ionizing radiation to remove electrons from these atoms. In the case of electromagnetic radiation, only X-rays and gamma rays have enough energy to do this. Therefore, it is best to avoid any direct contact with materials like enriched uranium. Not a good idea. In addition to the associated risks, radiation also has beneficial applications in medicine and industry. For example, X-rays are an essential tool for diagnosing fractures and other medical conditions, while computed tomography, or CT, provides detailed images of internal organs. Radiation therapy, in turn, is a crucial technique for treating various types of cancer, allowing for precise destruction of tumor cells. Now that we know which types of radiation cause negative effects, we need to understand where to find it. The most well-known sources are radioactive materials. The universe does not favor instability, so to become stable again, these nuclei emit particles in a process called radioactive decay. These particles can be alpha, beta, or gamma. Alpha particles are helium nuclei without their electrons. Beta particles are electrons, and gamma radiation is electromagnetic radiation, not a particle. Generally, alpha particles can be stopped by a sheet of paper, beta particles by a layer of wood, and gamma radiation is the hardest to stop, usually requiring a concrete wall. It is important to note that radiation protection is not just about blocking particles. Protection measures must be adapted to the specific type of radiation and the exposure dose. This may include using specific shielding, personal protective equipment, and proper handling and disposal techniques for radioactive materials. What these three forms of radiation have in common is that they all have the ability to knock electrons off atoms. This process can cause damage to the human body by breaking chemical bonds and forming fragments that can bind to other molecules in various ways, affecting everything from water to DNA. And here's where things get complicated. Radiation can damage our DNA, and these damages can take days, weeks, months, or even years to manifest. There are two main ways in which radiation can cause damage to DNA, directly and indirectly. In the direct path, radiation attacks the DNA directly, breaking the chemical bonds between nucleotides. In the indirect path, radiation breaks water, producing free radicals that quickly react with other molecules. These free radicals can initiate a chain reaction of DNA damage. DNA is made up of two strands connected by hydrogen bonds, and radiation can cause anything from the loss of a base to the breakage of one or both strands. Fortunately, DNA has repair mechanisms, but extensive damage can be irreparable. Radiation can cause both tissue effects and stochastic effects. Tissue effects are associated with cell death and are observed when a high dose of radiation causes the death of many cells in a specific tissue, impairing the function of the organ. High doses of radiation generally occur in accidents or during radiation therapy. However, X-rays performed in controlled environments and with appropriate quality do not pose a significant risk of tissue effects. Acute tissue effects may appear shortly after exposure, such as skin or gastrointestinal inflammation. Delayed effects, like cataracts, may take several months or years to manifest. Stochastic effects, on the other hand, are more difficult to quantify and are related to DNA mutations, with cancer being the most well-known. These effects are random and do not have a minimum exposure limit, but the probability increases with dose. Cancer can take years or even decades to develop after exposure. Children are more sensitive to radiation due to their higher cell division rate. Additionally, mutations in germ cells may be passed on to descendants, although there is no conclusive evidence of hereditary effects in humans. Studies with plants and animals have shown that radiation exposure can cause hereditary effects, but evidence in humans is still limited. Understanding the effects of radiation has evolved significantly since the early 20th century. The use of radiation has led to groundbreaking advances in medicine and other fields, but it is crucial to use it safely and consciously. Modern applications include nuclear medicine for diagnostics and treatments, radiation therapy for cancer, and advanced imaging techniques such as positron emission tomography or PET scan. This valuable knowledge began over 100 years ago in laboratories and continues to evolve with new discoveries and technologies.